Hi, today I'm going to demonstrate the use of Xcode Playground for exploring the new query API in Couchbase Lite 2.0. Couchbase Mobile 2.0 release introduces a plethora of new features, including a brand new query API with full-text search capabilities, automatic conflict resolution, a replication protocol based on WebSockets between the Couchbase Lite enabled clients and the Sync Gateway, and many more. Probably of most relevance to this discussion today is the Query API. The Query API in Couchbase Lite 2.0 is based on Nickel. Nickel is Couchbase's declarative query language that extends SQL for JSON. So if you're familiar with SQLite, you will feel right at home with the new QueryBuilder interface. As you can see from this example here, the QueryBuilder API reads like a DSL or a domain-specific language. So in fact, this API is unified across all the platforms that Couchbase Lite supports. Of course, there are going to be language-specific idioms, but at a high level, the QueryBuilder API is unified across the platforms. This makes it very easy to use the use the query defined in a specific language and map it or translate it to any other language. So even if you are not a Swift developer, you can use this Xcode Playground to explore the queries in Swift, and you should be able to get a good feel for what the APIs are all about. And you can take those queries and easily map it to Java, Objective-C, or C#. If you're interested in learning more about the QueryBuilder API, you can do so by going to our developer portal at developer.couchbase.com. All the links that I'm going to be referencing in this video will be added to the resources notes section. So let's go to the API references document. I'm going to use the Swift version, but of course there is the equivalent for Java, Android, and C# as well. So let's go to the API reference and search for Query Builder. So as you can see, the Query Builder is a factory class, and you can invoke the select function or the select method to return a select instance. Now on the select instance, you can actually call the from method. The from method in turn returns a from instance. Now on the from component, you can invoke a join, a where, a group by, and so on. So going back to the example that we saw earlier, on the QueryBuilder interface, you can call a select. And in this particular case, I am looking for all the properties in matching documents. From is from the data source. Where is you can apply a filter query to the query, and then you can actually have a limit, which is useful for pagination. You can limit the number of results. You can also have an offset as well. So this type of Query Builder API would probably remind you of a Fluent design pattern if you're familiar with that. Now, if you're not familiar, I would recommend that you do a quick Google search on the Fluent interface. And there are many articles on this design or API design pattern. I'm looking at this Wikipedia article, and this is a good introduction. So as it is discussed here, it's a method for constructing object-oriented APIs. So the QueryBuilder API in Couchbase Lite is implemented using the Fluent interface API design pattern. So as you saw in the QueryBuilder API spec, it is implemented using method chaining and method cascading. And that's how you can build out the query. I'm not going to go into more details on the Fluent interface. I would recommend that you do this reading offline. So now let's get back to what we are here for. That is to use Xcode Playground for testing the queries in Couchbase Lite. Now, if you are not an iOS developer, You are probably not familiar with what an Xcode Playground is. You may or may not be familiar. So if you're not familiar, you can go to the Apple documentation and look for Xcode Playgrounds. The Xcode Playground is an interactive environment that allows you to write and execute Swift code immediately. So it offers a very convenient way to learn and explore APIs to prototype stuff without having to create a full-blown Xcode app project. So this is a perfect use case for exploring Couchbase Lite API. In our demonstration, we are not going to be creating an Xcode Playground from scratch. I have built an Xcode Playground for testing the query API. So we are going to get started with that playground. But I think it is useful to have some background knowledge of what an Xcode Playground is, and maybe you can create one yourself. But I would expect that you would probably just extend the one that I have set up and the one that I'll be sharing here today. So in order to use the Xcode Playground that I have built, you would have to install Xcode if you don't have that already. To install Xcode, go to the App Store and look for Xcode and go ahead and download and install it. In my demonstration, I'm using Xcode 9.3, which is the latest version. But you could use any version greater than 8.3.3, although I would just recommend that you use the latest version. So please go ahead and download Xcode. If you have downloaded Xcode, the next step is to download the Xcode Playground that I have built for testing the queries. You can do that by navigating to the GitHub repo, the Couchbase Labs GitHub repo. So you can go to Couchbase Labs. So github.com/Couchbase Labs and search for Playground. Now you see that there are, because I'm signed in into my GitHub account, you see that there are some of the private repos that show up. They are not going to show up in your case. You will only see the public repos. So the first public repo that you see here is the Couchbase Lite iOS API Playground. So let's go ahead and clone this. Once you have cloned this repo, go into the folder and list the contents of that folder. Notice that there is a folder, subfolder named Cottage. Let's go into this folder named Cottage. And let's look at the cart file. The cart file specifies the dependencies for this particular project. And well, the first one is commented out, so you can ignore the statement. But the second line, it points to the GitHub repo corresponding to the Couchbase Lite iOS framework. And it specifies the branch, which is the 2.0 release branch. Now, as more newer releases are published, the playground will be pointing to the new release. So before that, what is Cottage? Cottage is a dependency management system for Cocoa applications. Now, if you're an iOS developer, you'll probably use Cottage in your other projects, or you probably have used CocoaPods. Now, think of Cottage as another option or an alternative to CocoaPods. There are differences between the two, and there are pros and cons to each of them. Couchbase Lite framework is distributed through CocoaPods as well as Cottage. You can also manually download it from couchbase.com/downloads. In our project, we are going to use Cartridge. So in order to use Cartridge, you need to have Cartridge installed. Again, go to github.com/Cartridge. There is a very informative README guide here. If you're not familiar with Cartridge, I would recommend that you take a quick read. It also explains the differences between Cartridge and CocoaPods if you're familiar with CocoaPods. And of course, there are installation options. There are 3 installation options available to you. My favorite is Homebrew, but you can go ahead and use the installer, or you can just build it from source. So if you don't have Cartridge installed on your system already, please go ahead and install it right now. So once you have Cartridge installed, verify the installation by typing in this command. So of course your version may vary, and that shouldn't really matter. I don't see a problem with this using a specific version of Cartridge. Just use the latest one. So now that you have Cartridge installed, the next step is to actually pull down the Couchbase Lite iOS framework. So as I mentioned, let's quickly look at the cart file one more time. It points to the GitHub repo that hosts the Couchbase Lite iOS. So use this command to download Couchbase Lite. Notice that I am using the ---- no build option. This just tells Cartridge that check out the source, but don't build it. That is because I am going to build the framework from within the Xcode project. And we'll see that in a little while. It might take a few minutes depending on the speed of your network, so just be patient here. Okay. Once you have downloaded, you can verify this by typing in Cartridge with a capital C, checkouts. That is the folder into which Cartridge checks out the source, and Couchbase Lite iOS. You can see that the source has been checked out. It's not built as yet, so the framework has not been generated. So let's go up one level back to the root folder, clear things up here, do an ls. Now as you can see, there is the CBL query playground, which is our playground that hosts all our queries that we're going to use for testing. In addition, notice that I actually have an Xcode project. Now at the beginning of this demonstration, I mentioned that one of the advantages of a playground is that you don't need a full-blown Xcode project. And that is still the case. But in our particular instance, I needed a way to for the playground to be able to use the Couchbase Lite framework. So I needed a way to build the framework and import it from within the playground. So there are probably better ways to do that, but the simplest option that I found was to build out a dummy Xcode project, which is sort of like a container, and that hosts the playground as well as the Couchbase Lite project. Now let me go ahead and open the Xcode project so you have a better sense of what I'm talking about. Okay, so in order to open the Xcode project, just do open CBL test project, and this is the Xcode project. This is going to automatically open the project using Xcode, which you should have installed by now. Now before we do anything, let's examine the project. As I mentioned, the CBL testbed project, it includes the playground and it includes the Couchbase Lite Xcode project that you checked out using Cartridge. So you can expand this and see that's the source code, And this is the playground, and it's got a whole bunch of pages. We will examine that in a little bit. Now, what I'm trying to do here is the project itself. Just know that the CBL testbed project itself is really a dummy project. I used the standard single view template for creating the project, but the project itself does nothing. In fact, I would not be running this app at all. I'm not going to be running this project. I'm going to be executing the playground. The only thing that the project serves to do is used as a container for hosting the playground and the Xcode project, the embedded Xcode project. So before we can start using the playground, there are some setup that needs to be done. You probably noticed that within the project, I've got two CBLite files. Now, if you're not familiar what these CBLite files are, this is the extension that you use for denoting a Couchbase Lite database. Like if you're familiar with SQLite, you have a .SQLite file. Now, CBLite stands for the CBLite file. Now, in order to exercise the queries, you need a test database. So we have two sample databases that are bundled with the GitHub repo. One is which is the travel sample, and there is one join DB. As the name indicates, the join DB is used mainly for join queries, and the travel sample is used for the bulk of queries, almost everything except for the join queries. Now, for us to be able to use or access this Couchbase Lite database from within our playground, we need to host the CBLite files in a specific folder on your machine. And in order to find out what that is, just go ahead and click on any of these pages. Okay, I selected the basics. You can select anything. And go to this function, create or open database. So this is where I open the database, and then after subsequently I'm going to execute the queries against the database. So the database a directory is playground shared data directory. So if I jump to that definition, right at the very bottom, as the name indicates or as the description indicates, it is the URL for the directory where the data is shared. And it is at the path documents shared playground data. So what this means is that you have to host the join DB and the travel sample DB, the two Couchbase Lite database files. They have to be hosted in the shared playground data folder, because that is the path that I have specified during database open or creation. So let's go ahead and do just that. The first thing that we're going to do is create the shared playground data folder. Now I do have a shared playground data folder already created because I've been testing around with this playground. So, but then for convenience, I am going to specify what the command is. So you would do a make dir, and that creates a folder under the documents folder. The documents folder should exist on your Mac. Remember not to include the pound sign, because the pound sign, because I already have that, the pound sign essentially renders this command as a no op and it does nothing. So be sure to execute this command, just the highlighted portion. So once you have created the folder, the next step is to copy these two CBLite files, the join DB and the travel sample DB, over to the shared playground data. So these two DB files are located in the root folder of the repo. So again, I have already copied these two CBLite files into the shared playground data. But for convenience, I'm going to specify the command that you would use to do so. So let's copy this into the documents folder, shared playground data. And similarly, copy over the join DB CBLite folder into the document shared playground data folder. Note, don't just copy and paste. Note that I have a pound and that's going to make it no op. So just copy the highlighted portions, okay, and execute that command. So once you have done that, verify that the folders exist. Now in my case, I have a whole bunch of CBLite files because I've been testing with a bunch of databases, but in your case you should just find 2 of them. Okay, so there's a whole bunch over here. In your case you should just have the travel sample.cblite2 and the joindb.cblite2. Now this setup is necessary the first time you pull the repo, okay, or you clone the repo. Subsequently, only if you are changing the database, if you made some edits to the database, you are using a brand new database for testing purposes, you don't have to do these steps. Once you have copied these folders into the shared playground data folder, you don't have to redo these steps every time you run the playground. So this is a one-time thing that you have to do. Now that you have the stuff set up in the right folder, let's go back to the project. Okay. Before we run or before we execute the playground, let's take a quick look at the playground itself. The playground includes a whole bunch of playground pages. Each of them, as the name indicates, it should be quite self-explanatory what they do. So I have tried to segregate the queries based on what they do, like string manipulation, pattern matching, parameterization, and so on. You can get started with any of these pages. Okay, the order does not matter. But for convenience, I am going to, it just is probably more logical to just start with the table of contents, because TOC stands for table of contents, and that would serve as a starting point for navigating to other pages. Again, completely optional. Now go ahead and check this render documentation checkbox, and as soon as you do that, let's close this, we no longer need that. You see that there's a pretty rendering of the content. So it makes it very easy to read and to navigate. So these are all the pages that are available. Let's go ahead and go to the intro to where's clause. Almost all, at the very top, you see that I am importing the Couchbase Lite Swift framework. At this point, this framework doesn't exist as yet, because all we did, if you remember, using Cottage was to just pull the source. We haven't built it. So let's scroll down to the very bottom. Almost all of my pages, in fact all of my pages, I follow the same pattern. The first thing I do is to create or open the database. I'm not really creating a database. I'm going to open a pre-existing database. If you recall, I had copied over the travel sample and the join DB databases. So I'm opening that local database. And then I'm calling functions that I've written that serve as wrapper around the various queries. So I exercise the different queries depending upon what I'm looking for. So over here, it's an introduction to the where clause. So let's look at the create or open database. And as you can see here, the first thing I'm doing is opening the database. In this specific case, it's the travel sample database, and I'm trying to locate that in the playground shared data directory. Once I open the database, I'm going to go ahead and execute these various functions. So let's look at this definition here. These are very simple. This is almost like a unit test, right? A query unit test. So it's very straightforward. It builds out the query using the QueryBuilder API, and it prints out the results. It returns the results, and all I'm doing the results at this point is printing it out. Now, before I can execute this playground, the first thing I need to do is to build the project. So in order to build the project, select the scheme here. That is the CBL testbed. That's the Xcode project. And don't select the Mac as the target. Select one of the simulators. It doesn't matter which one you choose. I'm just selecting the iPhone 5s and I'm using 11.3. My CBL testbed project, I think the baseline, the deployment target is iOS 10. Although Couchbase Lite itself, it goes back up to iOS 9, at least at the time of this recording. So the first thing that I need to do is build this project. So let's go ahead and do that by typing Command B. So select Command B and it's building this project. This is going to take a few minutes because the first time it's going to build the Couchbase Lite framework as well. Okay, now that the build is successful, let's go ahead and execute the playground. So in order to execute the playground, you see this teeny tiny execute playground over here. Let's bring this up so it's a little more visible. So you got to tap this execute playground. So let's do just that. So once the playground is executed, you see the results because that's what we're doing. We're just printing the results from running each of these queries. You can examine the results in the console, and of course you can extend this query. You can also extend this to do some manipulation of the results. Now, while you can examine the results in the console, something that I like to do is to actually look at it inline. So in this particular case, because it is a playground, you can do that. Over here, you see that this particular statement was repeated 10 times, and it makes sense because I am looking for 10 documents. That's the limit of the number of results that I expect. So it executes it 10 times. Let's do a quick look over here. Probably this would be better. And let's start examining this. So you see that. Go even further. So it's very convenient. So if you don't like to look at the results in the console, I think this inline version of examining the results or inspecting the variables and so on is very useful. So you can go anywhere over here and actually examine this is the search query and this is the value that it takes. And this is what the matches result is. So very, very straightforward and very useful. Now that you know how to execute a basic query, what are some of the things that you can do with it? Of course, first and foremost, you can try to tweak some of these queries, right? So instead of getting like just the first 2 results, let's get first 5 results, okay? And maybe you don't want to execute all the other queries because it clutters the console. So you're interested in a specific queries. So you can go ahead and comment out the other invocations. Go to this method, jump to the definition, and you can tweak the definition in any way you want. So right now, this particular query is looking for all documents of type hotel. And of course, it's subject to the specified limit. So instead of querying for documents of type hotel, let me go ahead and query for documents of type airport. Then I am going to go ahead and execute the playground. So you see these results, and it returns back documents of type airport. And of course, you go back here, you should also see that it was executed 5 times because that is the number, the limit that I had set. So this is a very simple tweak that you can make to the query. Of course, if you look at some of the other Pages, there are more complicated queries, and you can tweak those queries as well, and you can see what happens. I would also recommend that if you extend the playground to add new pages to exercise new set of queries, or if you have your own database that you would like to test against, it would be great if you can contribute this back to the GitHub repo. You just do a pull request, right? Just submit a pull request, and if you can contribute this, I think that would make this playground that much more powerful. One quick note before we end. If you look at this QueryBuilder API, even if you are not a Swift developer, it should be very straightforward to see what it's doing. Now, if you familiarize yourself with the query APIs, I think it should be quite easy for you to take this query API and map it to any language that you're using for your development purposes. Now, with that, one last thing is on blogs. If you go to blog.couchbase.com and search for Couchbase Mobile Query, pretty much the top results that you would see relate to the Couchbase Lite 2.0 Query API. Almost all the examples that are discussed in the playground were used for generating these blogs or for use for writing these blogs. I would recommend that if you're interested in learning in detail about